Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's panel on creating culture during uncertainty. And we are certainly in uncertain times. But the four people I have on the panel today are all in the weeds right now and thinking about the culture of their organizations or their teams and thinking deeply about culture. And I've been fortunate to chat with over 150 remarkable people on my Intentional Performers podcast. And these people have overcome adversity, thought deeply about leadership, and have set up intentional lives for themselves to perform at their best. So the coronavirus has created challenges for so many of us throughout the world. Ben talked about having to learn computers for the first time. And I know many of us are dealing with challenges that are just new to us. So these panel discussions will help you if you're in need of learning and growing and dealing with some of these challenges. And while everyone on the panel has tremendous expertise, I also want to note that what we're going through is truly unprecedented. So there might be questions that the panelists don't have answers to, and that's completely okay. This isn't designed to give you all the answers. It's simply designed to have you think deeply about how you can handle this challenging time. So with that, I want Cody to just give an introduction to himself, and we'll have each of our panelists also introduce themselves.
Appreciate that, Brian, and thanks for thinking of me. And I'm really looking forward to learning from Tanya and Chris and Ben as well. So a fantastic opportunity. So thank you for bringing us all together. So my name's Cody Royal. I coach Canada's men's national AFL program. So most people know Aussie Rules either because they've stumbled home from a bar at 2 a.m. and flicked on ESPN, or they follow Pat McAfee now, who is apparently the biggest fan and has been talking about it since there was that 1 week of games that we had that he saw as well. So, so my particular dynamic, so it's the men's national team. So I literally have players from Vancouver to Halifax and everywhere in between. We have about 30 domestic club teams that I pick the best Canadian-born players from. And we play international games against other countries, and then we work towards what's called the International Cup, which is a tri-annual World Cup of every country except Australia. So we go and play everyone from China to Mexico and Colombia and South Africa, and it's just this magical kind of mini Olympics around this indigenous sport that's known as Aussie Rules. So very, very cool for me to have moved to Toronto, Canada 10 years ago and still be able to be involved in my sport. And then, so if people have seen me before, they've probably seen me through Where Others Won't, which was my book about leadership and culture. And I was lucky enough to interview people like Ralph Kruger from the Buffalo Sabres when he was chairman of Southampton Football Club, Ted Sundquist, the former GM of the Denver Broncos, for that book. And then that spun into a podcast. And that's how I think you and I got connected, Brian, through the podcasting world. And I've been lucky enough to do some similar kind of things like this with guests like I had Adam Grant and Joe Dumas on episode 1. So it was, I had to learn, talking of learning technology, try learning how to interview people like that on your first podcast, Ben. So, but it's all around leadership and culture and just having discussions and more to learn for myself. But it's been a great avenue for other coaches to learn as well.
Tanya, why don't you go next?
Cool. Well, I echo Cody's sentiments in thanking you, Brian, for bringing us together. I feel very blessed to be a part of this conversation, and obviously these are uncharted waters for all of us. So definitely look forward to learning today. A little bit about me. Again, my name's Tanya Vogel. Grew up in upstate New York. Started playing soccer when I was 4. And I feel like, soccer and sport has opened a world of adventure for me. Currently, I sit as the director of athletics at George Washington University, where I was fortunate enough to played soccer there. And I was also fortunate to come back at a point in my career and be the head coach of the women's soccer team there. But really, I've spent the better part of the last 20 plus years in intercollegiate athletics. And I think, some of the things you'll hear today, I feel like I've been a part of teams my entire life, and being part of teams allows you to understand organizational development and really culture building and how you can thrive in different environments, including the unknown. I think also we've been given a great opportunity here, and those of us that are leaders of organizations, despite not knowing exactly where this is going to go, we have a tremendous opportunity. So I look forward to this conversation, and just really am grateful to be a part of it.
Thanks so much, Tanya. Chris, why don't you go next?
Sure. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Chris Herman. I am the softball coach and senior women's administrator at Williams College, which is a Division III NCAA school in New England. Been coaching softball and also coach volleyball and golf and a few other sports along the way, like many people of my women, especially of my era. And really enjoyed that now, and would have been 2020. Well, right now we are in the middle of the season that wasn't. And as a spring sport coach, I know it's not a contest, but it really is hitting me in a couple of different ways as a person, as somebody who is desperate to be on the field myself right now, and of course as a leader of other people. The kids, my players, their parents, the recruits, their parents, alumni seem to be fine, although also quite sad for their younger counterparts. But really, my experience is much more significant in terms of time than most of the people in my world, including my colleagues. So whether I want to or not, I'm looked to as a leader, which has been a great and fun challenge for me. Aside from my coaching gig at Williams, I'm a coach of coaches. I work mostly one-on-one, although a lot of other ways with coaches of all sports at all levels. I have a soapbox I could get on for a long time about how coaches are sort of the forgotten element in athletics, especially in collegiate athletics, where student athlete experience is rightfully at the top of the list, and then institute.
Hi, everyone. It's Brian, and I'm certainly not trying to interrupt Chris as she was giving an intro to herself, but my computer completely froze as we were talking, and so the recording stopped. So I'm going to give a brief intro to Chris and finish up her intro, and then we'll go over to Ben Olson in a minute. So what Chris was just talking about is that she's really passionate about coaching coaches, and she does a number of things to support them and really feels passionate about supporting them. And Chris is going to share throughout this conversation some of the many hats that she wears. And Ben Olson is the longest tenured head coach in DC United history. He's been coaching them for the last 10 years. In 2014, he won the Coach of the Year in Major League Soccer. And he also had back-to-back seasons making the MLS playoffs in 2014, 15, and 16. And he also helped lead one of the biggest turnarounds, or actually the biggest turnaround in Major League Soccer history, when he helped the team come from last place to winning first place in the Eastern Conference in 2014. And I've been fortunate to see Ben coach and be in the weeds with Ben. And he is somebody who's deeply passionate about winning. He's highly competitive, highly thoughtful, and strategic about how he thinks about running an organization. And he also was a very successful player. So if you follow soccer, especially American soccer, you would know that Ben played for the U.S. national team, where he had 37 appearances that they call caps, and he scored 6 goals for the U.S. national team. And he also played for DC United for a number of years, including helping them win the MLS Cup in 1999 when he was the MVP. He was also Rookie of the Year in 1998, and he's won a humanitarian award in 2003 and has won all kinds of accolades as a soccer player. And if you talk to Ben, one of the things I love about him is he's always asking me how my family is doing. And I know he has 3 kids and he's happily married and talks about his family and always is asking me how my family is doing. So he's just an all around great human. And I've been really fortunate to have him come into my life as a friend and somebody who I enjoy chatting with on a regular basis. So this is going to be a little strange because I'm going to go back to Chris chatting about what she's doing with her team to help them stay connected and communicating with each other during this chaotic and crazy time. And I'm no different than anybody else. I struggle with the technology as well. And this will be a good reminder for me the next time that someone's struggling on their end with their technology. So hopefully this didn't disturb or interrupt the flow too much, and we'll do with it as we can. So thank you all for being here, and I'm going to kick it over to Chris.
Anyway, right? So we have You know, our group me is as robust as any, and we have, you know, 3 or 4, probably every kid is in 3 or 4 different groups on that. And, you know, we've translated office meetings to Zoom meetings, but it has been very interesting to see what some of the advantages have been. For me, as somebody who has sort of everything on paper, I have lots of things on paper, or just a lot of clarity, maybe hopefully not too many words, but lots of clarity if people know sort of what it's supposed to look like, that we've been able to just focus on what we can do, and recognizing we're sad about what we can't do. But it's been interesting to me that this whole obviously massive disruption has not been not really stopped us in our tracks as much as not being able to play.
Chris, what platform do you use to communicate to your players?
We use a lot of so GroupMe, which is just a text app that's you know, it's like WhatsApp. And we use that all the time. That's often how we communicate. I'm just a big Google Calendar person, so it's not just like communication, but in terms of keeping in touch, we use a lot of Zoom, and encouraging people to go face to face on Zoom as much as possible. But then the kids, I'm sure, have plenty of other, you know, just from kid to kid, lots of other ways to do it. I'm a person without an iPhone, so FaceTime is not my thing, but it's so a lot of that. And it's always encouraged, to Cody's point about like, hey, I'm feeling sad, right? Or whatever it is. We actually have one of our groups is called List of Fails. So like, that's where you put like when all the stupid stuff happens. So sometimes it's just goofy, but other times it's not, like, and that's been up for like 3 or 4 years. And so even like alums will put in like, yeah, I went to work today and like, you know, whatever, my fly was down, or, you know, whatever happened. So we're really encouraging like, hey, stupid stuff and you're going to screw up a lot. And that's like a big part of our culture, but that's, you know, that's not new for us. So now it's just, you know, more about how my mom or my sister or my dad is, or my dog is driving me crazy. That's the stuff that's happening day to day. But the training and the communication is actually quite similar.
Can you all hear me? Am I back?
Yep.
And
Hi.
Welcome back, Brian.
If ever there was a time where you felt like you didn't really matter, it felt kind of unimportant, it is going in and out of a facilitated conversation where it seems like people are having good conversations without you. So hopefully you all enjoyed chatting. And I tried.
You brought the coaches together, man. You know this happens every time. As soon as
Exactly.
you've been to parties where you meet another coach and you're like, let's go to the back corner and talk about coaching, because I'm not interested in the rest of this stuff.
That's his Brian does that to everybody. It's his strategy.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Or it was technology.
yeah, it was a plan. My computer froze. It's just frozen. It doesn't even have to do with the internet. So I don't even have that as an excuse. Then I got my wife's computer. That wasn't working. So now I've got you on my phone. So what a world to live in, that we have 3 options to do video conferencing. But, you know, I jumped in at one point. I know, Cody, you were talking about some heavy stuff. And Chris, you were just mentioning some of the things you all are doing from a culture standpoint. So I don't know what I missed, but Tanya, I don't know if you shared what you're doing at GW, but you started in the introductions, and when I heard you talk, you said we're really thinking about, you know, how we can do things now and what opportunities exist. Can you talk about some of the things you've been doing since this all started, and since, as Chris mentioned in her introduction, some of your students aren't even getting to have their spring season?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to start there, and that's as a leader, we all started with the crisis, right? So the first things that we had to do was solve that or stabilize that piece, which for our spring sports student athletes was this devastation that included everything from letters from them, from their parents, like don't cancel. And I can remember there was a 48-hour period that probably felt like 3 weeks where we were actually up in New York for men's basketball, and it went from, you know, okay, we're going to conduct a tournament without fans to all right, we got to cancel this tournament. And then within 12 hours, we're canceling all of spring. And so dealing with that crisis and making sure that you're communicating regularly and trying to calm a storm that you yourself don't really, you really don't, you're just entering the storm with everybody else. I think was part of our first tasks as leaders. And then it was, okay, well, how are we going to do business? I mean, we are in the business of touch, right? We're in the business of face-to-face. We're in the business. I got athletic trainers and strength and conditioning coaches. They are literally, you know, their trade is face-to-face and hand-on-hand, right? And so how do you set an expectation that it's our charge now to figure out how we're going to do business differently? And so for the leader, it was exactly that. Let's get on the phone. Let's start with our WebExes and our Zoom meetings, setting an expectation for, hey, I know this is different, but let's figure out how to do it. And let's be innovative, and let's have fun with it. And let's remember that we've got a bunch of student athletes that are craving our leadership, and they're craving that touch. So let's figure out how to do it. And the great thing about being an athletics director is I got 120 full-time employees that are way more innovative and way more creative than I am. And so as long as I set that expectation and then encourage them to really think outside the box, the stuff that's been coming out of not just our athletics department, but the stuff that's coming out from across the nation, Division 1s, 2 and 3, like it's incredible. And we're all, you know, we're copying and looking outward for great ideas. And it's been a great time of innovation. And so I keep saying every day I send a little text to my team and I'm like, let's grow as opposed to let's go, because I just look at this as a great opportunity to grow. And, you know, where a lot of people are saying, okay, this is a great time to catch up on Netflix. I really look at it. It's a great time to invest in yourself and to invest in one another and really grow. I mean, when else in our lifetime have we pressed somewhat of a pause? And so we've got this great opportunity of a little bit more time to be innovative in how we're going to teach and train and develop our people. So it's been a lot of fun.
Well said.
Ben, I'm curious for you, as I have to swipe to see you. At the pro level, we've talked a lot about how you played college soccer, and then you get a lot of kids that come in from college soccer, and they have an environment where there's more parameters, maybe there's more control. But at the pro level, how are you thinking about this time and the interactions with your entire staff and the players? And are you doing anything intentionally to try to stay connected to them? And how do you think about it?
Yeah, we always joke when we do our interviews at the college combines, when we sit down with college kids, we're always amazed at how committed they are to their college and their college coach in almost, and don't take this the wrong way, in a cult-like way. And
Perfect.
it is amazing. It is amazing the way they, to talk about, Tanya was saying, they just thrive leadership at that age. And I think all pros do as well. But it is a different, it's such a molding time for them. And they're so committed. They're all at the same age, you know, similar personalities in some way. You know, then you kind of, the difference there is now you go to a pro, and I have a 20-year-old Estonian coming here who, has been in the country for a couple of weeks, and now he's locked in his house in Arlington, and he doesn't, you know, have any infrastructure. I got a 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid who we just signed from the academy, making money for the first time, and then I have an older guy with 5 kids in his home. So there's so many different dynamics with our group right now, and trying to keep tabs on maybe giving a little bit more love to certain individuals that we think might need a little bit more of a support structure. You know, we're in the business of controlling these players. When we have them from 8 o'clock to 2 o'clock, it's about control, and to have our hands on them, the trainers, sports science department, what they eat, how they train down to the minute, with the GPS and the heart rate, we're not used to not having control of these players. So now we're going to trying to check in daily with them through questionnaires, through them almost homework assignments from what are they doing, finishing their tasks physically, right? Whether it's the strength stuff, whether it's the aerobic stuff, all these things now are new to us. I too have a very good support system with sports science trainers, administrators. So they do a very, very good job of keeping tabs on these guys on a daily basis. Our priorities are keeping them safe, making sure they're in a good environment, making sure their fitness levels are at least sustaining to a certain level, because we were in 2 games in the season, so we built this level up through preseason. Now we have 2 games. If we can sustain that as a second priority, so when we do come back in a couple weeks or a couple months, we are in a better situation to get them fit, which is leading them into a very condensed schedule if they're going to actually have a season this year. And then our third priority is the injured players. And how do we, when you're not hands-on, get these guys to return to play? So that's kind of where I spend most of our days. One part of the continuing culture, Brian, we talked about when you were off was, I really am looking for ideas today on how to continue our culture that we have on a day-to-day basis, where I can look these guys in the eyes and do that virtually, and some creative ideas to kind of continue that, so we don't have to restart when we get back.
You talked about love there, Ben, at the start, and I think to marry together your idea there with what Tanya was talking about before was, I think this is a really good pause for us to actually learn about the human beings that we're dealing with. So again, right now, we're talking about how everyone's learning to use technology, and everyone's learning, to deal with the fact that the guy upstairs is doing jump squats, that reverberate through my apartment, or the dog runs into the back of or the kids run into the back of the conference call, or whatever it is. And there's this really unique time right now where everyone can empathize with everyone else around the world. And that doesn't happen very often. There's probably been the Great War, the Great Depression, and very few circumstances where that's happened. And so it becomes this idea of, can we really dig into, what do their circumstances really look like as players? Like when you take the mask off and you take the bravado off, and we can all talk about our fears and the things that we're thinking about right now, whether it's our family back in Estonia, or an elderly grandparent, or you can really dig in from a coaching perspective and learn about what's underneath the masks of our athletes and of our staff and the people, the receptionists. I think it's a really unique time to learn about that love, show that love, learn about human beings, rather than just, I've heard, particularly on Twitter, like a lot of coaches just giving their players X's and O's projects. I think the project here is to learn about human beings, because we have so much time to scroll X's and O's all over the whiteboard. I'm not saying go completely one way, but I think this is such a unique time where we all have some sort of fear and or some sort of common thing to talk about. Literally everyone on the face of the planet. So I'd love to see us using that, rather than just trying to do more projects on, my defensive midfielder should have actually been here rather than here.
I love that. I think through the first week of our telecommuting, and to Cody's point, it's like day 1, everyone's fine. We're dealing with the technology. Day 2, everyone's fine. We're dealing with the technology. Day 3, you start to see the stuff in the background. And day 4, especially for our staff members that had kids that are now You know, they've become teachers. They've become PE teachers. They're, you know, they're working across the room from their partner or spouse. I just remember day 4, I was like, oh, we've got to figure out some new things. And so that empathy knob got cranked up on day 4, and we've made adjustments. But to Cody's point, being able to really see people where they are at, and not let this just be a COVID moment, but really thinking about how we bring that into practice when we return to quote unquote normalcy, and remembering that everybody shows up on our playing field with different stuff going on, and how do we incorporate some of those, I guess, COVID moments when we get back to normalcy, I think will be a key for all of us.
I agree. It's been interesting because this whole getting back to normalcy thing, like obviously this is quite abnormal. But, and I said this a little bit before, but listening to everybody's challenges, not just on this call, but otherwise, are really reminding me that for many years, I've thought of myself as sort of not as good of a coach as I should be, because I focus so much on the culture and the environment and the people, and much less on the X's and O's. And so I always thought I was like sort of behind the 8 ball there, and I recruit the best players I can, and know that I actually don't. And with my model, with the less touch, I don't have that much time to make them significantly better players. So it works for where I am coaching. But I'm finding that's a huge boon to me right now. And getting back on the field and seeing the kids and being able to like give them a hug and shake hands is really something that I'm looking forward to. But I am not seeing that big a change in how we operate our team, which I think just sort of is proof in a way to what we're all saying, right? Which is like being humans and touching each other, and saying like, hey, how you doing? And like, oh yeah, that's a cute puppy. All that kind of stuff really does matter, while still trying to figure out ways to help them get better without us, right? Which is, coaches are, you know, notorious for being, I can fix this people. And so now we can't fix it on a bunch of different levels. So it's been really, really interesting for me to see the difference in the people that I work with based on how they sort of approach the main piece of the puzzle for them.
Chris, earlier you talked about coaching coaches and how we're forgotten about in this whole thing. And it's funny you bring that up, because at 8 a.m. this morning, I did a live podcast about coaching health. And I've presented at a bunch of different sports leadership conferences about that idea, and why we don't see ourselves as talent as well. And so while we kind of scratch around for, you know, 0.1% gains in the gym with our athletes and seeing if they can squat a little bit more, there's potentially a greater competitive advantage by us actually taking the high performance lessons that we have about optimizing human beings and applying them to ourselves. So, you know, sleep, you know, we tend to, you know, the newspaper article is about the NFL coach that gets 3 hours sleep and sleeps at the facility and is working so hard. And we create champion out of that, and we canonize that person and lift them into sainthood because they didn't sleep, and that's what allowed them to find this wrinkle in the opposition game plan. And to use a word that my wife's Irish, and so to use a common word there, it's just bollocks. And you know, I think it's a really interesting time for us to think through our coaching and ourselves and our own performance from a holistic health perspective: sleep, nutrition, diet, you know, spending time with our families, protecting time for our families and our friends. So I'd be interested in your perspective. So we've talked about how we've facilitated the cultures with our athletes that we've built up. Have you seen anything amongst the coaching group that you work with and that you coach that's any different, you know, through the kind of 2 weeks or whatever we've been going through this? Oh, we can see you now.
Cody, what was that?
I was just asking Chris if she'd seen anything amongst the coaches that she works with that's any different during this time.
Yeah, I think Chris just said that she's in the same boat as me. So technical difficulties for sure.
Well, why don't let's open it up to anyone then. Like how have the coaches been dealing with this issue? Because it's for us as well.
Tanya,
yeah, you know, I'll speak. There's a couple of things that happen. One, and I appreciate the leadership with the NCAA when they basically put a pause on recruiting. So as we canceled all our seasons and sent all our students back home, the NCAA said also you gotta stop with in-person recruiting. And I think for our coaches, what we did was we created a platform. We have about 20 head coaches and an additional, 45, 50 assistant coaches. We created a platform for them to share ideas on how they're staying connected. And that platform turned into, oh, and by the way, this is the book I'm reading, and this is the podcast that I'm following, and these are the things I've done with my family. So it became a place for them to share. And I think it was important for me to say, it's okay to do this now, right? Because I think sometimes one of the biggest challenges with our coaches is that they're going to go. They're driven. If you've hired the right people, they're driven, they're competitive, they're always looking for an edge. And the world has basically said, like, we're gonna just reel back in a little bit from that edge. And so I think what I've seen is just this idea sharing, almost an online conversation about what they're doing to invest in themselves. And so again, from a leadership standpoint, I think it's my charge to figure out when we return to normal, how can I create that? And how can we do an after action review on what we learned from this process that we think is important to carry with us going forward, because the competition and the drive and the edge is going to return, right? And so how do we as leaders identify what good things come from this and that we can put into practice? And I think it's going to be a challenge, but something that we should keep on our list of things to do after we're done with this.
Cody, follow-up question to that, which speaks to it, is a lot of the executives that I work with, we always talk about working on your business versus working in your business. And a lot of times C-suite executives are always just in it, and they're just driving and they're going. And I think coaches are the same way, especially when they're in season. And Ben, we've had conversations about it. When you're in it during the season, it's hard to think long picture. It's hard to work on stuff. Tanya, even the athletic department, when you're in it, there's so much that needs to be done execution wise. And Cody, I'd be curious your perspective as well, working in business and working on the podcast and the book. So for each of you, I'd be curious to learn a little more about working in the business versus working on the business. And if you take out business and think about the culture, and are you doing anything now that's maybe more long-term, because you don't have to develop a game plan for the week and you don't have to necessarily execute in the same way you did previously. So Ben, maybe you give it a go. And Chris, if you have perspective on this as well, maybe I'd love to hear from the two of you first and then kick it over to Cody. But Ben, are you doing anything to work on your culture, on your organization that maybe you wouldn't have been able to if you were playing right now? And you're still muted, Ben.
I've kind of shifted it selfishly more to myself and my family, and the filling that void. Having that void, there's some anxiety to that of being a coach. I got to be touching these guys every day. I need to fill this day with productive time with my players and getting them better. But I've also been understanding that this is out of my control, and for the first time in my life, I think it has been beneficial for me, I think, as a human being. This time of year, I'm looking through my children. I'm looking right through them, giving them the time, helping with homework, dealing with I have 3 young kids, and same with my wife in a lot of ways. So I'm using this time to, again, accept that I have some time on my hands, and to fill that void through being a better father, being a better husband. As you know, I paint. I have a hobby. I have a studio across the way. I've been painting more, and again, I'm still doing my job. I'm still waking up thinking about that first, and connecting to players. But there's only so much you can do during this time. In my world, that's how I feel, and to take advantage of some of the things that I haven't been able to do for 10 years while I've been in this intense cycle of coaching and being all consumed in a result oriented job. So that's, yeah, being okay with painting a few times a week and going to my studio, trying to enjoy homeschooling with my children, taking more walks, more hikes, and just being more present. Now, the trick is, as we've talked about many times, how do I do that when the games start to kick in? And I got 4 players and agents and, coming at you, and we just lost, right? And it's Sunday morning, and now the kids are in your bed and you lost last night. How do you focus then? It's very tough. I've been trying to do it for 10 years to figure that part out. I think in a lot of ways, it's gotten worse for me. And as a player, losses were harder as I became an older player, more experienced player. And I don't know if that was because I was more invested, but as a coach now, losses are even tougher. And you would think it would be the opposite, that it would get easier and better. But the consumption and the all-in factor of being a coach, the longer I do it, you don't, at least I don't figure it out. I don't figure out the balance. I have not been able to do that. We've talked plenty of times about certainly methods to go about that and to keep some perspective, but it's emotional, as you all know, and it's a tricky thing.
Chris, one of the things that I was blown away by with you when I had you on the podcast was how process and system oriented you are, and how over the years you've built these systems and processes to help you develop the culture and develop the team that you want. So maybe a 2-part question. One is if you have any insight to that question I asked previously, or is there anything that you're doing differently now that's beneficial? And then 2, I'd love for you to share what you've created over the years to try to help you handle the stresses and the challenges that Ben's talking about.
Sure. Well, thanks so much. It's been, so the short version of my personal story is that about 25 years into my coaching career and probably 600 or 700 games, and that's in D3 where we're playing 30 a year, so a long time. I sort of had a moment, it almost was a moment or 2 moments where I sort of stopped in my tracks and changed everything. I revisited all the things that we do and that we didn't do, and my attitudes and my approaches, and so there's a long lot to that. But so having sort of stopped and started over, I've sort of built not from the ground up, from the inside out, really. I guess, which may be a little bit of a cliche, but I took the time. One of the things I actually did was I stopped reading and listening. I guess podcasts weren't that big a thing, but I stopped reading other people's stuff and I started thinking about my own stuff and doing a lot more writing. I literally and I'm like probably many of you, the one who reads all of the good stuff, right? But I just stopped and I decided I needed to figure out who I was going to be as a coach. And I redid everything. And then that turned into, it went from sort of who I am and my values to the processes, and really developing culture, and also developing like plans for how I'm going to run a season, X's and O's, Y's, or how I'm going to run a recruiting plan. So I have all this stuff on paper. And by having spent that much time doing the planning, now the execution is actually fairly simple for me. It's not always easy, but I know what's going to happen next or what I should do next. And it's really given me an incredible peace of mind to know that as long as paying attention, right, and I'm doing what I said I was going to do, I'm going to be okay. And then, to Tanya's after action review, I do a lot of that. So I spent most of my time planning, and I have the systems, and the execution is fairly simple. And then in review, I go back around. So, and the winning came along with it. So as a competitive person and the emotional like this, the numbers do not lie. I went from, we were always good. Williams has an amazing tradition of winning in all sports. But went from like, yeah, we're doing okay to like really killing it. And that I know is a factor of some of the stuff that I did, but also sort of my approach to it and how I come to each day with much more clarity in terms of what things should look like. Literally, that's my language is what does it look like and what does it not look like? And if we can define what it's supposed to look like and define what it will look like if we're not doing what we said we're going to do, which is, I believe, at least a triple negative, then we are going to be okay. So it's process, but it's also just super amount of clarity, and everybody knows what they're in for, and only the people who are going to really like that kind of program come here. So it's really embedded in my recruiting process. So it's been really fun. And as a mentor of coaches now, I'm also an assistant AD here. So I'm not a sports supervisor, but I do mentor our newest coaches on a regular basis. I feel like curiosity is the most important trait for me as a coach. And just by figuring out what's going on for them and how I can help them, it's been really, really interesting. And one of the things that's come out of it is like, we're not that important, really.
Chris, how much of that process do you share with the players?
Almost all of it. Almost all of it. It's different. It's in different bite-sized things. There's sort of like, things for all of us, for any member of our team, or for any of our program, for any member of like this year's team, which
Right.
doesn't include like recruits and alumni, for captains, for position groups even, and then certainly for the staff, my staff, which is me and one other person. But that's important. Like we like literally, she thinks I'm crazy, but we sit there and be like, okay, we're going to have like a staff meeting, and here are the things that are on a piece of paper. These are the 10 things, 10 dimensions by which we measure ourselves. How are we doing? And, that doesn't need to take that long, and it feels a little contrived, but in the process of setting those things up and setting them to paper and asking her and asking myself, like, are these the things? Like, I mean, part of it is like, are we asking the right questions? And by consistently asking, are these the things? And then asking the questions themselves and then figuring out what the answers are. And then asking again, were those the right questions? Or what do we have to do next? It's just a cycle of activity and consideration that honestly makes things pretty easy. I mean, not emotional, not challenging, but I always feel like I know what's going to come around next or what should come around next. And then there's the flip side, which is we say HIHOD, HIHOD, which is head and hands on desk, when you're like, gosh, darn it, I knew I should have, right? So like, if you always know what you're supposed to be doing, then you really know when you're not doing it, which is the downside.
Brian,
those are some of the things.
Sorry, Chris, I wanted to touch on something you touched on there, but Brian, the name of this is Creating Culture in Uncertainty. Is that what we titled it? So you touched on there, Chris, meetings with your assistant coaches, and, in thinking through as problem solvers, like we all are, essentially, whatever your title is, our job is to solve problems. And what I've seen a lot, again, in business or in sport, is what happens in times of uncertainty or underperformance is what leaders tend to do or like top leaders, like I'm a head coach. So they tend to suck up more and more of the responsibility away from assistant coaches, or in business, away from VPs, and they take it and because they want the control, right? And so And so what I'm mindful of in this period of time as well is actually making sure that one, I don't do that, and I actually push responsibility back to my assistants, including those conversations. I don't need to speak to every single one of my players every single day. We as a coaching group need to speak to all of our players. And so, I think that's one thing that I've been mindful of. And again, this has come in creating a culture for us where I'm at a point where I have assistant coaches who they actually coach in game. And my role in game is opposition analysis and finding our one or two players that have a matchup advantage over the opposition. So I'm lucky in that I have that access. I know you said, Chris, that you'd have one assistant coach, and so your dynamic may be different. But I think, if I were to pass on a message to any head coach, is don't suck up every single thing that you can possibly do during this time. Make sure you push back down on that and give others a voice, give others opportunities to coach, give others opportunities to learn about the players, to pass on messages, to create dialogue, to all the different things that we do. Just knowing that as leaders, we are naturally inclined to, when we start losing, like Ben talked about, is like you get like, how much more can I control? And you try and grab hold of everything. Whereas what you're trying to do is have culture replace rules, and not just apply more and more rules because you're losing, or more and more rules because there's a period of uncertainty. Is you kind of want to wait and have that culture govern the process of uncertainty.
Also, Cody, to jump on there, there's a really great opportunity for the coach who struggles with that idea of deferring or diffusing responsibility. Like, there's no games happening anyway, so you can give your assistant some big projects that feel really, really important, and they're not going to hurt anything. They're just going to report to you. They're not bringing it to the field. So I've been encouraging a bunch of coaches that I work with for the same thing. Like, oh, what are all the things you said you'd do when you had time? Well, first of all, now you have time, and you can probably do 2x that if you have just one assistant, right? Give half of the things to them, and just if you're nervous about it. I mean, even the very youngest, newest assistants, I'm consistently surprised by what my young assistants, it's stupid to be surprised, but they're really interested in this too, and it's such a great opportunity. And as head coaches, we all are really responsible for growing our people too. So I think that's a really important point.
It goes the importance of making sure those hirings around you are the right people, and they better hide some of your deficiencies. And I know we're all perfect up here, but I learned a pretty hard lesson a few years into coaching, that I was doing everything. I was trying to manage up, down, do training session, deal with the injured players, deal with agents, scout, and you're too thin. So at some point you got to boil it down and understand what you're great at. For me, it was, I learned the hard way through a really tough year, a losing season, one of the worst seasons we've ever had as a club, one of the worst seasons in the history of the club. I learned it that way, and to figure out that, as painful as that year was for me, it showed very, very clearly my strengths and weaknesses. And so I did a little bit of a reboot and a self-analysis, and who do I need to surround myself with to make sure, as a whole, our staff is moving this club forward. Yeah, just, and whether that's a personality test, I've gone through plenty of personality tests around that time to really figure out. I know, as elementary as it sounds, but I encourage all coaches. I was like, get a personality test, get a management test. Brian would tell you, I'd be the first to tell you, no, I'm not doing that. I've got it all figured out. But once I did, it was like, whoa, this thing kind of nailed me. And I better figure out all those weaknesses that, when I identify potential people to help me out or help this club out, they better have some of those things that I'm not that great at. Because of course you can work on your weaknesses and your deficiencies as a human being, but at some point you have to trust others around you to do things you're not. And put the ego aside, because it'll get in your way.
Tanya, I'm curious to, Ben sort of talking about strengths and weaknesses. When I think of one of your strengths, it sort of goes back to what Cody was talking about, your ability to connect with people and build relationships. And Tanya is somebody that she wanted to have her office next to a window where the student athletes walk into the facility every morning so that she could just see them and wave to them and smile. And so, Tanya, I know you care deeply about one-on-one connection and personal connection. And I'm thinking about what Cody's talking about and letting others like reach out and not having to do it all yourself. So I'm curious, during this time, what are you doing to empower your staff to build some of that relationship? And what are you doing also to stay connected? Because I know it's something that feeds you and fuels you and is an unfair advantage that you have as a leader.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And I think as Chris and Cody were talking about that kind of delegation and empowerment of staff, I was thinking, no question. And we've all learned that lesson, whether it's the way Ben learned it or another way, we've all learned that lesson. And that being said, there's an importance not only for me in having that touch, but I do think there's an importance for others to experience that touch or that contact with the leader of the organization. And so figuring that out, I think is important. Now, what I've done, I've set some expectations for senior leaders and head coaches to at least place a value on establishing whatever that system's going to be with their staff or with their student athletes, trying to make it more regular. I acknowledged that a day during this period of time feels more like 3 days or 4 days. So don't, especially early on, don't say, well, I'm going to do this once a week and think that that's going to be enough, because again, I think that time has really changed in the last couple of weeks here. But for me, one of the things I offered was, listen, if you're having a team meeting and you think it's important for your staff or your students to hear from me, I'll kind of do a drive-by. And so I did one this morning with our gymnastics team, where I just showed up for the first 5 to 10 minutes of their Zoom meeting, said hello, told them how much I missed them, and then I zoomed out. And so I think we can do that, where we can have kind of a small abbreviated touch and connection, but then get out of the way as our other leaders are running their meetings.
Well, I've got a question for you there, Tanya. On that is, has this taught your coaches what a connection is? So there is a drastic difference, even in this forum here. So we can see each other right now, and I can see all 4 of you, and so I feel very, very connected to you. Versus, say, a text message, which technically is a connection, but doesn't come with an emotional feeling that you and I are looking at each other as I ask you this question. So has anyone mentioned anything like that, or do you think about that in terms of, so when going forward now, is sending a text message enough for me to connect?
I love that question. I was on the phone with one of, well, I'll be open with it, Jen Rosati, who's our women's basketball coach, and she was talking about recruiting during this period of time. And she said, normally we call people. The only time we ever use video calls was when we were calling somebody internationally. And she said, it appears that for these prospective student athletes, they actually prefer this. And so we'll probably do this going forward. And I thought, again, this is one of those things where I think we are learning a little bit about ourselves, that a text message or an email is not nearly as personal as we can be with technology today. So I think slowly we're learning that lesson. I have had a few other conversations with coaches about, what are your plans to stay connected with your students, and where they've offered up, we've got the text messages or the emails that said, don't underestimate the power of these Zoom calls. And I'd say over communicate early on, because we're all feeling so disconnected, because not only are we away from school, but we're stuck in our houses with whatever that has to bring. So we're learning, Cody, but I think it's important to continue to raise that level of consciousness. And then again, these lessons that we're learning during this period of time, how do we make them more part of our regular practice going forward?
I've definitely been seeing this in the recruiting. Well, two things. One is the kids of my players who are home. So we're still on spring break, so they don't have any homework yet, but they are like, so we do team calls, and I do class, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior meetings, and I also do individual meetings, but we've done those kind of Zooms, and there's a different dynamic in every one. But one of the things they consistently say is like, this is amazing because I told my mom I absolutely have to be on a meeting with coach, so you have to leave me alone, close the door. Just like Brian is asking his kids to be quiet. They're like asking their parents not to bother them, but it gives them sort of a sacredness around the communication that you don't get with a text message when everybody's just sitting on the couch and texting each other. And the other thing that I think I mentioned earlier, but I'm seeing a lot more parents on, and I'm fine with that. I think sometimes I've said it's because I'm older, but I think it's mostly because I'm just willing to talk to whoever needs the information. So I've seen a lot more. So in their household, they're doing more things together, obviously. And it just seems silly to like talk to one person and somebody else is just a couple feet away out of the, you see that you know the mom is over there anyway. So I'm like, why don't you just turn the camera so we can see each other. So just touching more people, and I think that's a positive for me. It's getting our culture and who I am as a recruiter, but just also as a person. And the other thing I was going to mention is I'm noticing with a lot of our coaches that the coaches who are more introverted and less comfortable generally with communication are, I think, falling behind. I think they have to really do these things like Tanya is saying, but also it's much more challenging for them. And they're saying, well, no, I'm good with some emails. And then their athletes, many of their athletes are struggling with that some more. I hear that from my players, from their friends. So it's interesting to see, like, can your personality really be the driver so much in this moment? I don't think it necessarily can, which also makes it easier for people who are over communicators, to your point.
Chris?
One other quick thing,
Tom.
Brian. Yeah, we think about multitasking and how we know that you can't actually multitask, but we all try it. When you're texting or even on the phone, I think there's more freedom to multitask. Whereas when you're on a Zoom, it's like, I can't check my phone right now because everyone will know. And so there's this element of being a little bit more present with one another when we're on this form of technology.
It's interesting, Tanya, you bring that up just because while we're doing this, I started on my computer and I got my wife's computer. None of it was working. Now I'm on my phone and there were all these messages that kept coming across the screen because I didn't have it on Do Not Disturb. And so I do not disturb on my computer all the time because I actually work on Zoom a lot with clients. But little tricks like that also can help. And I think people are just starting to learn what they can do to not get hijacked from a message coming in. So that's just a little tip or a tool that I've found. When I hit that Do Not Disturb button, I can really do deep work and really get focused. Cody, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, and I know two of you are in college athletics, so this might not be as relevant, but Ben, you and I at the start of the conversation were talking about trying to mimic real life and just use technology as the facilitator. And one of the things that we did a couple of Fridays ago was we just had virtual beers together. So again, I've got guys in Australia at the moment. I've got guys from Vancouver to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and not mandatory, but we had 20 something guys just having a beer, and it replicated what we would do if we're in a camp or something together as well. Just that, and silly things happened on the call. Like it's kind of turned into everyone was wearing like their favorite jersey or a sports jersey. And if someone, changed into a new hat, there was also another team, everyone had to drink or whatever those stupid things are. But we also don't need to just be serious in this time. Like there's opportunities for us to be together and have downtime virtually as well. And so for us, like some of the comments about just that couple of hours together, just having a beer was just, this culture is just magic. And so, yeah, it doesn't, I think as well, yeah, we don't need to just be only doing serious team activities together. We can have fun and have some downtime and just enjoy each other as people.
I've been doing
Virtual
a lot of
happy
Zoom
hours work
happy
with
hours.
coaches
Yeah.
too.
Virtual happy hours work for
I
coaches
probably have
too.
had 10 in the first 12 days. I think I had 10 happy hours of the variety, not with my players, just for the record.
So I actually think that's Benny, you're muted. I don't know if you had something there.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I've never been around Ben at a restaurant before, so I don't know if he does happy hour ever.
Well,
That seems like a lie.
it was
As you both smirk at each other.
Well, I picked an interesting time to not drink, starting January 1st, 2020, for the first time in my life. So yeah, I've been sober through all this, including with 3 kids locked in the house with them. So it's been a challenge not to have a happy hour every now and then.
Good for you. So Cody, I'm actually glad you brought that up, and I think it's a good place for us to start to wind down here. So first of all, as I was going through all those technology issues, like I felt frustrated, stressed, upset, disappointed, and then I'd come back and it seemed like you all were flowing without me. And so it was really cool to just jump in and out and see that. And one of the things that I was reminding myself is it's out of my control. I'm doing the best I can and trying to make it happen. I think all of us are feeling that in some capacity, whether it's Ben, you talking about, having contact with your players and the inability to do that. Cody, you're always producing content, but you also have a job and you're wearing multiple hats and you're coaching, and there are things that aren't going to necessarily go well. And Tanya and Chris, both of you are so intentional about how you think about contact, and right now is a big time of year for your athletes, and the inability to actually be able to help them perform right now, I'm sure is a feeling of frustration. So I think for all of us to sit and learn and feel that is really important. But to close, what I'd like for each of you to do is just share where people can learn about you. Some of you are more active on social media than others, or something that you're passionate about, or something that you want to promote and give a megaphone to. It could be a nonprofit or something along those lines. So Cody, I'll kick it to you first. Then we'll go to Tanya, Ben, and Chris. You'll take us home.
Yeah, again, thanks for the opportunity, Brian, and for bringing us together. And we were joking that coaches just jam like this anyway. So if we all met at a party, this conversation would have happened. So thank you for bringing that together. All of my stuff, my coaching, consulting, content, ideas, podcast is all at codyroyal.com. The good thing about having a name like Cody Royal is that I'm very easy to find because no one else has those Twitter handles or those Instagram handles or that website, or I think there's one kid that has the same name. So, but I'm very easy to find online. And yeah, I'd say, if I've said anything that interests you, I'd say my podcast might be interesting. Again, it's a bunch of ideas where I bring together usually someone from sport and business, or two people who are talking about similar things, but one might be in the United States and one might be in the UK. And so bringing them together into a forum like what we're doing here kind of allows them to jam on ideas and bounce ideas off each other. So I try to facilitate that kind of compound interest idea where, the ideas flow onto each other. So that might be interesting to any coaches that are listening in here. If anything I've said makes any sense to you. So I'm very active on Twitter, so feel free to either follow me there, send me a DM, get in touch with me. I'm sure you can tell that I love chatting about coaching, so always happy to chat more.
Cool. Similarly, I've got a unique enough name that it's pretty easy to find me online. I think my Twitter handle is probably like Tanya Vogel 7 or something like that. It's where I put most of my professional stuff. I'm going to be honest. The thing I'm most passionate about right now is something that's somewhat under attack, and that's intercollegiate athletics. Many of us are products of intercollegiate athletics, and I think we're being tested, whether it's through revenue distributions and shortfalls that are going to be facing us in the near future, or name, image, and likeness, or defending amateurism and all that. There's specifically for Olympic sports and for female athletes, it's super important that we continue to defend it. And so, you know, that's what I'm passionate about, and something that I speak on panels and on podcasts about often. And I'll continue to defend it because I think it's critical for our young people to have a place, and America does it differently than anybody else by tying it to education. But I'll continue to defend it because I think it's a great thing that our country's doing. So thanks for having us on, Brian.
Ben, go ahead.
Don't have much social media presence. No Twitter, no Instagram. I have thin skin, so I can't take the comments, the comment section. The one charity that is a little bit special to me is DC Scores here in the Washington, DC area. It's our charitable arm with DC United, just a wonderful outlet for kids to play sports, healthy living, poetry, reading, and the arts. And it's a near and dear to my heart because of the art-sport connection. It's a very strange connection, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense that art and sport are connected in this charity, but it is, and I've been working with them for 20 plus years. So check them out and support them. As most nonprofits right now, they're all struggling, and they're all struggling for money and fundraising as everything dries up. So if you can help in any way, please do.
Just before we go to Chris, just a quick shout out to DC Squares. Their CEO is a woman named Bethany Henderson, who's brilliant and an amazing leader, and somebody who I've gotten to know over the years. And they hosted a event with Ben a couple of years ago where they sold Ben's art. And Ben is an amazing artist, and so much so that I bought one of the pieces at that event. And Ben's son, I took a picture of it, and Ben's son said we had it upside down, so we need to fix it. But Ben is an amazing artist. Ben, if people want to also find your art, where can they do that?
They could go to benolson.art, and if they have interest in any of the pieces, I'm certainly open to discussing charitable contributions of those purchases to go to their charity or one of my own. So we can discuss that offline for sure.
So see, I got Ben to promote something, and
good job, Brian.
Go to benolson.art. benolson.art. Go check it out. Chris, I know you have to run, so
Sure.
You know, you are involved with a lot more than just Williams, and you do a lot at Williams. But I would love for you to promote some of the stuff that you're passionate about as well.
Sure. Well, like Tanya, I'm passionate about collegiate athletics, and most especially, as I said earlier, the sort of the defensive coaching I think needs to rise to the top. And big decision today I think is going to really impact coaches negatively more than anybody else around eligibility and scholarships. That's something, and I put that into practice really in my private coaching business, where I've long asked the question, you know, why does Tiger Woods and Serena Williams and Jack Welch, for that matter, all the CEOs have coaches that help them sort of see their world, and sport coaches, they have leaders and mentors on many occasions, but they don't have coaches more formally, and I think that should change. And so I do some of that. You can find me, my coaching, it's chrisherman.com is sort of my website, and then on social, most of the places I'm GT3, which is Go Team number 3 coaching on Twitter and Instagram. That's how I operate there, and I'm quite active there. And so that's my number one passion, in addition, obviously, to the game of softball and my players, maybe in reverse order. And lastly, a big passion of mine is a nonprofit called Team Impact that Tanya's probably heard of. I'm a founding member of Team Impact. Myself and a couple buddies started that about 10 years ago. And what Team Impact does is match children with various medical challenges with currently almost all collegiate, but any sport teams. And the kid gets a jersey and gets to be matched with the team. And it's very interesting. We had a board meeting this morning talking about the financial implications, but also really that one of our taglines is we fight lonely. It's not that exactly, but something about all in for not being alone, right? That's what being on a team is all about. And so for children with medical challenges, generally they can be not alone by being with the team. And now that we're all alone in a way with this, team impact has really become important. And that's teamimpact.org, or actually probably .com now, although it is a nonprofit. I really encourage people to look at that. It's a huge passion of mine. And full circle, all the systems and processes that Brian was talking about and I was able to shine a light on really came from my experience in building Team Impact, which, although is a nonprofit, we built it like a business. And that was the moment, and one of the moments in time that made me stop. So really everything in my world is meshed with those things have been very, very cool. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about it.
I felt like a slow pitch softball player, not a fast pitch one, as I lofted that up to Chris.
Yep.
And I was a little worried he was going to mention Team Impact, because I know Tanya, one of your teams, just recently did something with Team Impact. So they do amazing work. I encourage everyone to check them out as well. I'm on Twitter at Brian Levinson, Instagram intentional_performers. And you can listen to all these conversations at intentionalperformers.com. I appreciate all of your time so much. I wish I was on here for more of the conversation than I was. I'm a little bitter about it, but I look forward to conversations with all of you in the future. And I appreciate all of your leadership and your willingness to come on and share your time during such an uncertain time as well. Thank you all.
Thank you, guys. Good luck. Be safe.
Thanks, Brian.
Take care. Thank you.
There we go.